If you're lured by seafood on the menu, then you might be in for some bait and switch. That's the message from the reporting and research of the Boston Globe this week with a recent pair of articles. By visiting a number of eating places and checking DNA samples, the Globe found there is often a difference between the fish on the menu and the fish on the plate. Sometimes the differences were minor, but in other cases there were dramatic differences in quality, price, and the possible effect on people with allergies. Our guest is one of the Globe reporters, Jenn Abelson. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, what got you going on this story in the first place?
Another reporter and I, Beth Daly, were looking into the case that we wrote about on Monday about Tom Katz, who is a Boston wholesaler who has sold TGI Fridays, what Fridays thought was grouper, and it actually turned out to be Vietnamese catfish. And this was this case that proceeded for years and years, and only now is he facing punishment for it. And got us just really interested to see if you can fool a chain as big and as reputable as TGI Fridays with fish, like what else is happening at our local restaurants.
So as you point out in the article, there were actually people at Fridays who looked at the fish and said, this doesn't look like the right color.
Yeah, it was, I mean, the executives there sort of sent an email to him and questioned the texture, the color, and they were assured just on his word that it was the right fish, and proceeded ahead, rolled it out to hundreds of restaurants, called it an Atkins approved fish, and turned out to be otherwise.
And of course, this was a multi-million-dollar boondoggle, I guess, really.
It was. I mean, Vietnamese catfish is a far, far less quality and much less expensive fish than grouper, which is a highly coveted fish. Fridays itself, they knew they were getting some sort of Asian grouper is what they thought, but they ended up labeling it on their own menu as Key West grouper, which many consumers would consider to be something perhaps fished in Florida.
Now, this is a big chain. There are mislabeling issues at many places. Some of them are quite reputable, skipjacks, legal seafood, and very familiar places in the neighborhoods, Doyle's, Oriental de Cuba. So, I mean, this seems to be just almost everywhere.
It was a bit surprising to us. It was very widespread. It hit mom and pops, chain restaurants, sort of high-end celebrity restaurants, and it seemed that it was an issue that was found throughout the industry.
There's another fish that seems to be particularly prone to changes in labeling or switches in labeling, and that is tilapia and red snapper. Now, tilapia is my sort of bargain basement kind of fish, but what about red snapper? I'm not that familiar with things a little up the level there.
Red snapper is an incredibly popular fish. You wouldn't even know it's overfished because it's on so many menus, but what we found during our testing is out of the 26 times that we ordered red snapper, 24 times we got something else. At the sushi restaurants, it was entirely substituted. Tilapia took its place. In other cases, it was Colorado snapper, ocean perch, crimson snapper, and some others. Red snapper is a sweet-tasting wild fish that a lot of people just really love, and it's very prized.
Now, tilapia, you can make it taste good if you do certain things to it, but what's the difference nutritionally?
I mean, there's a few different things. I mean, first also, economically, it's far less expensive. It's almost, I think it's at least half the price. It's a farmed fish, and so nutritionally it has, tilapia has higher concentrations of the fatty acid omega-6. And it also just is not necessarily as great a source of protein as compared to red snapper.
So why are these things happening as far as, is it the people in the restaurant being unscrupulous, or are people more or less confusing them? Who knows?
I think it's a mix of reasons. We found restaurants that were deliberately sort of being deceptive. We found some restaurants and supermarkets that were just ignorant of the issue. They said that they were tricked by their own wholesalers and they didn't realize it. And others just felt like it was industry practice, especially among the sushi restaurants. They would call white tuna escolar, and they would say that they were interchangeable, they were the same thing, and escolar and white tuna are far different.
And of course there's a nickname for escolar.
It is the X-lax fish.
So that can mean a very big difference as well. Now, what about the globalization of fish? Because at one time, when I grew up as a kid, you went to the Adams Fish Market, and it presumably came from the fish pier in downtown Boston and the Atlantic Ocean, but it doesn't work that way anymore.
No, these days 86% of the fish that Americans consume is imported. The FDA, which has oversight of fish labeling, is the one agency that only inspects about 2% of that 86% that comes into this country. And it's just a long supply chain between when the fish is caught all across the world to when it ends up on your plate. And so it's just really a system that's open to abuse. And in 2009, the FDA was sort of taken to task by the Government Accountability Office. They said that the FDA had not spent enough time and had not prioritized fish labeling and seafood substitution, that it was solely looking at issues of food safety and sanitation, which are also incredibly important, but it had left open this other whole area to sort of flourish.
Chris, it seems there's also a trickle down here about how this affects local fisher people, because a lot of the times when there's something on the menu that is misleading, it sounds like it's local, but it's actually quite foreign.
We found several examples where restaurants had advertised local fresh cod or local fresh haddock, and instead we found that it was previously frozen Pacific cod, which tastes good, but it's quite less expensive, and it's flown in from faraway areas, could be frozen twice. And so, that has a direct impact. We talked to local fishermen who said that when you have these cheaper imports coming in and taking their place, it means that restaurants and chefs, they're not buying from them.
And of course, one of the other things that look kind of fishy, a rather upscale restaurant, Blue Ginger, they serve something called butterfish. Can be very tasty the way they do it, but I guess it's not exactly what they're calling it.
Right. It's what Blue Ginger is serving is actually sablefish, which is a delicious, expensive fish, but they chose to call it butterfish. And Ming Tsai, who's the owner there, said that he thought it was an acceptable name under the FDA. And there might be some people in the industry who call it butterfish, but the FDA has this list of acceptable market names that it put out in 2009. And there are 8 different species that can be called butterfish, but not this one, not sablefish.
So is there any idea about how to maybe cut down on the mislabeling? Is there a missing link somewhere, better regulation needed or something like that?
We found that other states have tried to take the matter into their own hand because there seems to be some major gaps in oversight. Florida, for example, they have inspectors at the state level who go out to restaurants. They look at invoices and they look at menu descriptions and they look at the product in the back to see if everything matches. And if it doesn't, they fine them. They can suspend their restaurant licenses. They can even revoke them as well. So
any advice for people going out for seafood?
I think you should ask a lot of questions of the chefs, of the owners, about where they're getting their fish. Try to be informed as much as you can as a consumer. I think if you're going to sushi restaurants and you're ordering white tuna, you're almost definitely not going to end up with white tuna. You're going to probably end up with escolar. And if you're ordering red snapper also, it's very unlikely you're going to end up with the real thing.
All right. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
From the Boston Globe, Jenn Abelson. We'll have more news in just a moment.